The 1978 attack on Kim Hill. The foundation of Mick Philpott's criminal legacy was laid not in 2012, but in the summer of 1978, in a brutal act that foreshadowed everything to come. His relationship with 15-year-old Kim Hill had been a 2-year masterclass in escalating terror, moving from public beatings with pool cues to shootings with a crossbow. When Kim, having endured broken bones and constant fear, finally sent a letter to end the relationship, Philpott's response was not anger, but a cold executioner's resolve. Going absent without leave from the British Army, he broke into her home and attacked her as she slept. The violence was methodical and excessive. He stabbed her 27 times with a large knife, slitting her stomach open and puncturing her lungs, liver, and kidneys. When her mother intervened, he stabbed her 11 times. His remark to arriving paramedics, "I wouldn't bother, she's a goner. I'd done a good job on her," revealed a chilling absence of remorse. Kim died twice en route to the hospital, her survival a testament to medical miracles, not mercy. This was not a crime of passion, but a display of absolute control, a definitive statement that leaving him was a transgression punishable by death. The attack established his lifelong modus operandi: identify a vulnerable target, exert total dominance, and respond to any assertion of independence with catastrophic, calculated violence. Kim Hill's body bore the blueprint of his psychopathy, a warning etched in scars that the justice system would tragically ignore. The lenient sentence and its message following the near murder of Kim Hill and the severe assault on her mother, the British judicial system had a critical opportunity to incarcerate a demonstrably dangerous individual for a substantial portion of his life. Instead, the sentence passed down, 7.5 years for attempted murder and grievous bodily harm, proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Philpott served a mere 3 years and 2 months before being released on the grounds of good behavior, a term laughably incongruous with the man who had coolly assessed his handiwork to emergency services. This early release was more than an administrative error. It was a profound communication of consequence, or the lack thereof. To Philpott, it validated his worldview, demonstrating that even the most extreme violence against women could be mitigated, that the system was malleable, and that his actions would not ultimately derail his life. It stripped away any external deterrent. While in prison, he further manipulated the situation, sending letters of hollow remorse and even marriage proposals to the woman he had almost killed, a grotesque performance of normalcy. This judicial leniency did not reform Mick Philpott. It empowered him. He walked out of prison in 1986 not as a rehabilitated man, but as a predator who had learned his violence had a manageable cost, a lesson he would immediately apply to his next victims, Pamela Leach and the teenage Heather Kehoe, with ever-increasing boldness. The grooming of Heather Kehoe. After his brief marriage to Pamela Leach, Mick Philpott, then 37, identified his next target, 14-year-old Heather Kehoe. This relationship perfectly illustrated his predatory pattern of seeking out extreme vulnerability. Heather was a child, and Philpott presented himself as a worldly alternative to her home life. She ran away to be with him on her 16th birthday, a move that isolated her from her family and placed her entirely under his control. The abuse began almost immediately, but it took a specific, horrifying shape tied directly to his burgeoning view of children as commodities. He beat Heather for failing to give birth to a girl, revealing his perception of offspring as products with designated types. His punishment was psychological and physical torment. He would lock her outside in the garden and, most terrifyingly, teach his older sons from previous relationships to be violent towards her, perverting the family structure to create a web of abuse. When Heather attempted to leave, he held a knife to her throat, a direct echo of the violence against Kim Hill, reinforcing the lethal cost of defiance. Her eventual escape, climbing over a fence and fleeing, came at the terrible price of temporarily abandoning her own children, a heartbreaking decision that led to a long court battle to regain custody. Heather's description of him as a Jekyll and Hyde character was apt. The charming groomer, transformed into a cruel jailer, a cycle he had perfected and would soon replicate on an even larger, more financially motivated scale. The assembly of the Benefits family with Mairead and Lisa. By the year 2000, Mick Philpott refined his approach, moving from serial monogamy with teenage girls to managing a household designed for maximum exploitation. He met 19-year-old Mairead Duffy, a single mother fresh from an abusive relationship, and immediately positioned himself as her guardian angel. Shortly after, he entered a relationship with 16-year-old Lisa Willis, an orphan and also a single mother. Both were archetypally vulnerable, lacking strong support networks, and Philpott offered the illusion of security. In a surreal twist, both women moved into his small council house, with Philpott marrying Mairead in 2003 and having Lisa serve as the bridesmaid. This throuple arrangement was not born of progressive ideals, but of consolidated control. With both women under one roof, he could monitor and dominate them simultaneously. They worked while he remained unemployed, collecting their wages and, crucially, the government child benefits for each of their children. The household expanded rapidly, with 11 children eventually living in a 3-bedroom home. Philpott was the undisputed CEO of this chaotic enterprise, a patriarch whose authority was absolute. The women, bound by shared trauma and his domineering presence, even formed a close, confiding bond with each other, a survival mechanism in their confined world. This setup created the perfect engine for Philpott's next phase, leveraging the human capital of his family for financial gain and public notoriety. The financial motive: children as currency. Within the walls of 18 Victory Road, a brutal economic equation governed family life. Mick Philpott had no legitimate income, but he had discovered a renewable revenue stream: procreation. Each new child born to Mairead or Lisa triggered an increase in the array of welfare benefits he collected, from child tax credits to housing allowances. Investigators later estimated his annual benefit income at around £25,000, a significant sum for an unemployed man. This transformed parenthood from a responsibility into a business strategy. He actively pressured the women to have more children, not out of a desire for a large family, but to stack up the payments. His concurrent campaign for a larger council house from the local authority was a logical expansion plan. A bigger property would allow for more children, and thus more income. The children themselves became financial units. Their names on benefit forms their primary value to him. This warped incentive structure explains the otherwise irrational size of his family. It was a calculated parasitic relationship with the state. Even his appearance on talk shows was partly an attempt to leverage public sympathy to force the council's hand for a bigger house. Every action was geared towards optimizing this benefits enterprise. The tragic consequence of this calculus was that the children's well-being was secondary to their function as claim tickets. They were not individuals to nurture, they were entries on a balance sheet, a perspective that would ultimately dictate their fate. The public persona: media manipulation. While privately ruling his household through fear, Mick Philpott cultivated a deliberately provocative public image. He understood controversy generated attention, and attention could be leveraged. His 2007 appearance on The Jeremy Kyle Show was a performance of defiant entitlement. Branded Britain's biggest scrounger, he did not shy away from the label, but engaged in heated, gesticulating arguments with the host, defending his unemployed status and unconventional family setup. He openly introduced both Mairead and Lisa, framing their arrangement as a matter of personal choice, indifferent to public scorn. In a documentary that same year, he allowed conservative MP Anne Widdecombe to stay with the family for a week. Widdecombe's observations were piercing. She noted he used a deeply derogatory term for both women, that his children never sought his affection, and that he cared for no one but himself. Philpott, however, saw these platforms not as exposures of his failings, but as megaphones for his grievances, primarily his demand for a larger council house. He was playing a character, the cheeky, misunderstood patriarch battling a rigid system, to an audience of millions. This media strategy served a dual purpose. It fed his narcissistic need for fame and created a smokescreen transparency. The brash, outspoken TV persona made it harder for outsiders to perceive the controlling, violent man behind the curtain, allowing him to manipulate not just his family, but the national narrative itself. Lisa's escape and the catalyst. In February 2012, The fragile ecosystem of Philpott's controlled world fractured. Lisa Willis, after years of abuse that included being hit with wood and having hot coffee thrown at her, executed a silent escape. Telling Mairead she was taking her 5 children swimming, she instead fled to her sister's home. This was an act of immense courage and precise planning, avoiding a direct confrontation she knew she could not win. For Philpott, this was an unacceptable loss of control, and more importantly, a severe financial blow. Lisa's departure meant the immediate loss of 5 children from the household, 5 active streams of benefit income. It also ignited a fierce custody battle, as Philpott was determined to reacquire what he saw as his assets. As the court date for the custody hearing approached, set for May 12, 2012, his frustration and greed fused into a reckless criminal idea. He was not preparing a legal argument. He was devising a scheme to manipulate the entire judicial and social care system. Lisa's act of self-preservation did not bring peace. It triggered a final, desperate gambit from a man who believed he could stage manage reality. Her freedom became the direct catalyst for the plot that would follow, as Philpott sought not just to win in court, but to orchestrate a drama that would permanently vilify Lisa and restore his financial portfolio. The arson plot, a calculated gamble. Facing the custody hearing, Mick Philpott, along with his wife Mairead and their friend Paul Mosley, conceived a plan of staggering cynicism. The objective was not murder, but theater. They would use petrol to start a controlled fire at the front door of their home in the early hours of May 11th. The script was clear. Philpott would then heroically rescue the 6 children sleeping inside, Mairead's 5 and her son Duwayne, from the flames. In the ensuing chaos, he would point the finger at Lisa Willis, claiming she had set the fire for revenge. The calculated payoff was multifaceted. Philpott would be lauded as a brave father, public sympathy would crush Lisa's custody claim, and the returned children would restore his benefit income. He might even finally secure a larger house from a sympathetic council. It was a plan that treated human lives and a deadly force like fire as mere props in a fabricated narrative. To ensure Mosley's compliance, Philpott even used sexual coercion, involving Mairead with him. They positioned an unused ladder at the back of the house, a prop for the rescue that would never happen. Every detail was considered, except for one uncontainable variable: the physics of fire itself. They gambled that they could manage an elemental force, viewing the act not as endangering their family, but as executing a complex transaction where the currency was perceived heroism and the prize was renewed control and cash. The fire and its aftermath. Just after 4 a.m. on May 11, 2012, the plan was set in motion. Petrol was poured through the letterbox of 18 Victory Road and ignited. The reaction was instant and catastrophic. The fire did not smolder, it exploded, racing up the stairwell with a ferocity that consumed the oxygen in the house in moments. The heat upstairs became an oven, exceeding 500 degrees Celsius, melting plastic and ensuring no survival. There was no rescue. The children, Jade, 10, John, 9, Jack, 7, Jesse, 6, Jayden, 5, and Duwayne, 13, succumbed to smoke inhalation as they slept. The community awoke to a scene of utter horror. In the following days, Philpott's performance as a grieving father was grotesquely inconsistent. He played the martyr in a press conference, yet was seen engaging in horseplay at the mortuary and flirting with a female police officer. The initial public sympathy, fueled by his media-trained persona, was profound. A local man, Bobby Southern, set up a charity for the family, tearfully defending Philpott, saying he loved his kids. This public facade was the ultimate testament to Philpott's manipulative skill. But for investigators, the evidence on the ground, the speed of the fire, the petrol residue, the absence of a forced entry, told a different story. The gap between the performative grief and the forensic facts grew wider by the hour, turning community sympathy into the backdrop for a rapidly narrowing murder investigation. The investigation, trial, and estigation. The investigation, trial, and lasting questions. The police investigation swiftly pivoted from Lisa Willis to the Philpott household. Forensic science provided the first irrefutable truths. Petrol traces were found on the clothing of Mick, Mairead, and Paul Mosley. The decisive blow, however, came from covert recordings. Bugged in their police vehicle, the trio were heard discussing their alibi, with Philpott stating, "It's my fault we lost our children." Other tapes captured deeply inappropriate sexual conversations and acts, revealing the coercive dynamics binding them. At their 2013 trial, the prosecution successfully argued for manslaughter, not murder, contending the intent was to stage a dangerous event, not to kill. The judge sentenced Philpott to life with a minimum of 15 years, telling Mairead her children died because she put her husband first. Mairead and Mosley were released after serving half of their 17-year sentences. The case leaves a haunting legacy of systemic failure. It begs the question, if Philpott's 1978 sentence had been a true life term, would 6 children be alive? It exposes how a psychopath can identify and exploit vulnerabilities not just in people, but in welfare and justice systems. Ultimately, the story of Mick Philpott is a grim examination of what happens when a human being is assessed not for their inherent value, but for their monetary worth, and when the warnings of past atrocities are archived instead of heeded.